Thank you to Her Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we move on to the first session of today, which is on plastic management policy and business perspective. I welcome all our eminent speakers of this session who are here with us today, and I welcome them to take the stage, please. Some of our speakers are joining virtually. I request our moderator, Dr. Nandini Kumar, consultant, CII-ITC Center of Excellence for Sustainable Development, to initiate the first session of the second day of Sustainability Summit. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I can plunge into a discussion on plastics yet again. I don't think any amount of discussion on this topic ever ends up completing, the range of things that we need to speak about throughout the plastics value chain. But looking at the quantity of waste that there is and the kinds of measures that need to be taken to address plastics, not just the waste, but also at other points of the value chain, I think it becomes necessary to speak about many different angles. So not just the industry angle, but also what kinds of policies help and aid, what kinds of investment would help. How are investors thinking about this? So this session is planned to introduce you to different parts of the plastics management situation and to try and get information about these different angles from speakers. And apart from having here distinguished speakers, these are also people who are deeply involved and very close to the ground in different areas. I'd like to start by introducing them here. Dr. Michael Bucchi. Dr. Michael is a counselor at the European Union delegation to India, based in Delhi. He leads the section responsible for dialogue and cooperation between the EU and India in the areas of environment, mobility, urbanization and smart cities, energy and climate change, small businesses, as well as the EU's foreign policy instrument. Before he joined this delegation, Dr. Bucchi worked in Jakarta, holding a similar responsibility for the EU in Indonesia and the ASEAN. He's worked in the European Commission on topics like forest adaptation, forest fires, climate mitigation, deforestation, biodiversity, and international negotiations, and has also taken part in the UN climate negotiations from 2010 to the 2015 Paris Agreement. He holds a PhD in engineering degree from the French National School for Forest and Water Management. Welcome to this discussion. We also have Dr. Anurag Priyadarshi, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a while now. He's chair of the advisory committee of the India Plastics Pact and Deputy General Manager, Community Services, Tata Sustainability Group. He is the practice lead for CSR and business and human rights at the Tata Sustainability Group and former director of sustainability at Tata Consumer Products. He's a member of the Rainforest Alliance Board of Directors. He's been a member since 2018, the UTZ Supervisory Board, and the Board of Ethical Tea Partnership. He's a thought leader and influencer and brings over 20 years of experience in sustainable agriculture and sustainability. Our third speaker today, who is joining us virtually, is Ms. Sujaya Desai. She's in Singapore and is an investment analyst at Stewart Investors. She's a portfolio manager there and joined the team in 2016 as a graduate. She's co-portfolio manager of the Global Emerging Markets with Jack Nelson and holds a MPhil in Development Studies from the University of Cambridge. Welcome, Sujaya, to this discussion. Nice to have you here. I wonder if we could begin with a few reflections on the regulatory aspects by you, Dr. Bukhi, and then perhaps I could go to the more specific questions. In your experience over the last few years, how have you seen the field with relation to plastics management develop in your specific charges? If you could just tell us with respect to that, what you've seen.
Thank you, Nandini. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address the summit. I'm very grateful to the organizers. I'm still new to India. I arrived 2 years ago, and at the time I met my counterparts, notably in the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And they told me about this ban on single-use plastic that was to be implemented. And I mean, it's a very laudable starting point. That's how we started. We started from the beach, actually, and we cataloged in Europe the 15, 20 most common plastic items, and we said those should go. It's a start, but it's a very small part of the journey. It's an important start, and I feel like now that the ban has come into force, I think there's still a long way to go for the actual implementation. But what struck me, not only then, but also when we started the negotiations, the consideration of starting negotiation on the global agreement on plastics and on ending plastic pollutions, is that there was a lot of concerns about whether India would be in capacity to live without those plastics, which is very strange because for a very long time, like until 30 or 40 years ago, we lived very well without plastics. But meanwhile, we have equated plastic with modernity, and we have forgotten how we live with plastic, which both speaks to how ubiquitous and how convenient plastic is, and at the same time, how fast we forget about other ways to do things. So when I had this conversation with the colleagues, at the time, India was proposing one resolution, and most of the other parties were on a different track. So we were about trying to reconcile the positions prior to starting the negotiations. And what I told them is, look at the opportunity. First, we don't say that you should ban all plastic. You should do a smart, efficient use of plastic where they cannot be substituted. But we also say that there are many areas in which you can substitute plastic, and then you create new markets, new opportunities. The bio-based materials, the recycling, the upcycling, the manufacturing of products offer a huge potential area of new economic development and innovation. So I think it's time. I mean, it's maybe slightly overdue to think not on whether India will have to import plastics, but whether India can produce the alternative products that will replace plastic where it can be substituted. Another point that struck me is that the very small plastics make it very convenient, but make it also very cheap. And this lack of alternative for people who don't have the necessary means to buy alternative, cleaner, safer, better quality, long-lasting products. I was in Mumbai just this Saturday. There was a beach cleanup organized by Afroz Shah and many of our member states. And I didn't organize anything. I just ended T-shirts, and I barely touched any waste, I'm ashamed to say. Still, I was there, and it was very striking to see that in 2 hours we collected 48 tons of trash. I say we, I'm saying 2,200 people, mostly youngsters, collected 48 tons of trash. And I'm almost sure that if we return next week, it will be more or less the same. And yet, it's more that's just a symbolic gesture because the people who were there on the beach, they could see, oh yeah, I'm using that crap. I'm using it for 5 seconds, and then it stays for years, if not decades, on the beach or in the water or in the stomach of a fish. So yeah, it's bad. And I mean, I think that was the real outcome, not the 48 tons, but the 2,000 plus youngsters that were exposed to that. At the same time, I couldn't help thinking, but do they have access to something else? So that notion of affordable sustainability, that notion that you can buy in bulk, that you have alternative distribution systems, which were basically the one we used before, but that they can be made more modern. Thanks to digitalization, we can further improve the logistics that come with replacing plastic packaging. So I think it's a huge field of innovation, and to that extent, we have worked too much, I think, both in Europe at first and also in India today. We have worked too much on the compliance side and maybe not enough on developing those alternatives.
Yeah, that's an absolutely very useful and accurate sort of rounding up of the situation also in India. And Sujaya, I'll come to you to just understand maybe if you can comment in general on the way you have seen over the past few years things changing in the investment industry with respect to plastics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And thank you for having me. Thanks also to everyone in the audience for attending. Can you hear me clearly?
It's breaking up a little bit.
Okay. How's this? Any better now?
I think so. I think so.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you again for having me. Perhaps for a bit of broad, I sense there's a bit more disturbance in the network. Okay?
Would it help if we were to switch the video off, do you think? Or, yeah, can we try that?
Let me Is this any better?
Could you just carry on speaking for a bit and we'll be able to figure that out?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So that for a broader context, at Sturt Investors, we're a long-only, long-term equity. That long-term time horizon has been a critical in launching our first sustainability strategy in 2005. So to us, thinking about sustainability headwinds and tailwinds is a natural extension of a long-term concept. And we view sustainability as a driver. So we've been investing in India now for close to 3 years. When we think about both the country and the benefits we invest in operating with, we're acutely aware that they can. Is that connection still pretty bad?
Sujaya, we are not able to hear you all that clearly. Is there a way out? Can something be done? Yeah. Could you try rejoining? Maybe you leave and try once again, please.
Absolutely. Let me give it a go.
We'll wait. Yeah. Let's wait for a minute. Maybe she'll be able to. Okay, let's just wait for her. Maybe it's going to take a little more time. Anurag, I'll come to you then. What are your reflections on what's been happening in the plastics sphere over the last maybe 5 or 7 years? Just a general sort of impression that you get being in the position that you are.
So I would thank you so much, CII and um, Nandini, for inviting me here. Always a privilege to be here to speak and view our thoughts on this. Uh, the very idea of the Indian Plastic Pact came at a CII some conference about 2 years back, and some of us who were part of, I was part of the Tetley discussions at the the UK Plastic Pact, and also with UK Plastic Pact, EU Plastic Pact, and we were, and it was always at the back of the mind. Look, this is working so good. You know, the UK Plastic Pact and EU Plastic Pact. Can't we have something like this for India? And about the same time, there was this huge, both from a regulatory perspective, you had the plastic waste management and handling rules coming in. You had a lot of public outcry about plastics and all its harmful effects. So many studies coming out. So there was always a reason, that can we have an India Plastic Pact? And it was absolutely timely. We are now reflecting, looking back the last 1 year, I think last 5 years, ever since the regulatory landscape changed, there has been significant interest. A lot of funding has come into the plastic economy. Absolutely the right time about the India Plastic Pact. Maybe I'll take a few minutes to also talk about the developments of the India Plastic Pact here in the last year. Um, the first thing which I think the India Plastic Pact did was about institutional building. Now that's so much important, and we were talking about it a few minutes back. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of patience. It doesn't happen overnight. But I think a lot of credit to CII, the Secretariat, Sina, and all of you in the team. So you've done a wonderful job in creating this, the Secretariat at India Plastic Pact. With the support from RAP UK and WWF, you bring in so much of your experience and expertise of how plastics pacts work in other countries. Pre-competitive collaboration is something which I absolutely believe this is the way forward. I mean, companies in any sustainability sphere, I've had the opportunity to work for sustainable agriculture, collaborating with the Unilever and many of our other competitors. And here again, in the India Plastic World, we are all different FMCG companies and other companies across the value chain, but especially the pre-competitive collaboration, I think that's important. Unless you have all the competitors on the same page, it's difficult to change that industry. And one company may not be able to change their packaging unless the others also do it. There's a cost involved, and India is a very cost-sensitive market. So I think the pre-competitive collaboration and finally the governance. The governance that India Plastic Pact has put in place is absolutely correct. It's vital. We have a advisory committee at the top with about 10 members across the value chain. Then we have all the members in the collaborative action groups. So we have 4 targets, and every target has a collaborative action group which is taking the target forward. So I think those are the institutional building part. Apart from that, you have the targets, which is important. We have so many forums that speak about plastics. Every other day you hear about a forum which is talking, but they're only talking. This is the Plastic Pact, which has targets for 2034 targets, and companies are required to disclose progress. So every year we have to report back with data in terms of where we are in this journey. I think that transparency and holding each other accountable is absolutely important. That's how we can progress on the targets. And finally, I would talk about the roadmap. All of you have received that document. That's the process. That's the way that we want to move the plastic pact ahead. Very clear, well defined, but at the same time living. So as we move, it's a learning journey. We will learn more things we don't know, and we will change that roadmap. From a techno-commercial perspective, I think getting the projects in place especially around recycled PET. You have projects around a few other things, and funding coming from UKRI. That's vital because we need these projects. We need to understand how certain things work or don't work and how companies can progress on that. And finally, now that Sujaya is back, I think the role of investors. I think that's one, because Steward Investors was one of the first investing companies, investors who came in India, and back in 2018, that's almost 4 years back, you had this workshop where you invited many companies where you've invested, a lot of them FMCG. And that was the first time, I realized that investors are going to be interested in packaging. And today, of course, it's at the top of the agenda. So you have not just investors, but the investor rating agencies. A lot of investors now look at the ratings. So how you fare on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, on the Sustainalytics, MSCI, so on. There are now quite a few, half a dozen good investor rating agencies. All of them have weightage, have criteria on packaging, sustainable packaging, environment, etc. So I think investors play a very important role, and I would request you to continue to play a proactive role in pushing the industry, because when you talk about it, it really moves the needle. So I think I'll stop there and.
Yeah, we can try Sujaya again. Sujaya, would you please just drop what your impression has been over the last maybe 5 or 7 years? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think starting off with a bit of broader context around spirit investment, if it's helpful. So we're I just wanted to check really quickly, is this connection any better?
I don't think we're having any luck with this connection. It just seems to be not audible. Is there any other way of trying to get her in? Yeah, maybe Sujaya, you carry on. We'll try and figure out something.
Okay.
Please. Yeah.
Perfect. So in terms of a bit of broader context, we're a long-only long-term equities manager. And so that long-term time horizon really was the critical factor that led us to launching our first sustainability fund in 2005. To us, thinking of these sustainability headwinds and tailwinds, it's a critical extent of having a long-term mindset. And we very much view sustainability as a driver of investment returns. So we've been investing in India now for close to 3 decades. When we think about the country and businesses within the country, we're acutely aware that they can't follow the same development pathway that other countries and companies have followed in the past. We simply don't have the planetary resources for it. Instead, what we've come across is numerous companies trying to leapfrog their competitors and peers. And I think that plastics is one such issue in India, where companies have to do things very differently to peers elsewhere. So as Anurag mentioned, we started thinking about this topic about 8 years ago. And the reason as investors we started thinking about this topic was that we're invested in consumer goods companies across the globe, both emerging and developed markets. And one of the things we noticed was that consideration around packaging materials was not as deep as we would have liked it to be, because the issue was one that was just continuing over time. And so, again, as investors, we were thinking about recyclability of packaging material, collection of post-consumer waste, is that solutions to these issues are not just nice to have. They are areas where fundamentally, as we know, a sudden change, either in regulatory change or otherwise, could pose a serious business risk to companies, affect the bottom line directly. These changes, we often see them as long tail or field, but we've seen as with the ban of plastic that they can come to pass very quickly. We believe that regulations here need to and will continue to move only one, and businesses need to find means to address these changes. So for us as investors, plastic management, it's a vast issue. It's one where we believe that collective action is required to address these changes. So, as Anurag mentioned, we organized that roundtable in Mumbai in 2018 to bring together a few companies to talk about this issue. And the reason we did that was that we wanted to see what opportunity there was for and the evidence of how useful knowledge sharing collective discussion was partly why we went on the Indian Plastics Pact. And some of the targets and ambitions that Anurag mentioned in the Indian Plastics Pact to reiterate the need for that action. So rather than focusing on off, we know that this issue requires a far more nuanced and long-term approach. We've been pleased to see certain companies we invested in India, especially bold long-term around recyclability of packaging material. We often joke that as investors, we like what companies do before they say. But this is one area that we've been very only the ambition, but also the transparent plans to reduce reliance on new plastics. The transparency of thinking and reporting in terms of published data on plastics use and progress goes a very long way in our minds to helping investors understand how the stewards of these businesses are considering the risks and opportunities in this area. I'll pause there because I think here is still pretty messy, but I'll back to you, Nandini. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaya. And both things work, actually. I was just thinking about this. It's the investment that can drive change. It's also regulation that can drive change. And as you mentioned, Michael, a little earlier, in India, we started out with the SUP bans. But of late, the EPR guidelines have also come in setting targets for companies. They seem to be quite ambitious. So that's for India at the national level. But if I zoom out a little bit, and I think it would be helpful if you could tell us a little bit about a very specific area of technology gap in meeting plastics management goals. How do you think the gap between the gap in technology can be met between developed and developing countries in this area?
First, I need to put a very honest disclaimer that my background is in forestry and not in technology. But what I can say is that whenever we have VIPs, very high-level people, excellencies talking to each other, they are all about technology transfer and technology upgrade. What strikes me is that they tend to focus on the very cutting-edge technology. You know, if you look at the the president of the Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, and His Excellency Prime Minister Modi, spontaneously they tend to think about very high-end digitalization, 5G, quantum computing, and those things. Whereas I think that the need is rather to adapt technologies that have maybe become mainstream in Europe, but cannot be transposed just as they are to India. And I think this adaptation of the shared philosophy of circular, resource-efficient plastic economy to the Indian context is has not been fully thought out yet. I think we look at the informal sector as something that needs to get modernized, that needs to be improved. Actually, it's the efficiency of waste collector, waste sorting, the reuse, the frugal innovation, I would call, the smart reuse and the collaborative, we would call product service systems that are just a shared economy in many cases. I mean, those aspects I think really need to be looked into and valorized. So it's not necessarily about very high technology. It's about adapting traceability technology. I mean, when we're talking about EPR, we are talking about reverse logistics. But I know for a fact that there is amazing reverse logistics happening in all streets of Old Delhi every day, except they are not called like that. So whether we can build on that organic efficiency for the reuse of various material that can either make a better use or substitute plastics, I think that's where personally I would see the most interest. So it's not only technology in the sense of hard science and computing power. I think it's a mix of technology and sociology and anthropology that make those technology. I mean, the general goal, the general philosophy, and what we try to achieve, they are the same. But exactly how it pans out in an Indian context, in Indian culture, with Indian laws, Indian infrastructures, Indian consumers, with Indian preference, and very fast-growing middle class. I think that's where we should maybe focus our reflections.
Yeah, I think it's a very odd sort of combination of the technology that you need for things like recycling to be set up, with EPR targets. And then, as you say, on the absolutely the other end of the informal value chain, how things can be strengthened over there. This is a very difficult gap, divide to straddle, but yet attention needed on both sides of it. With respect, very especially to the UN treaty, and maybe I'm wrong in assuming that you're the person who can answer this question. With respect to that, very specifically, I wondered if you have any reflection on how the fact that waste from many developed countries still gets transported to less developing countries can be dealt. Are you aware of how this is being factored in, if it is at all?
Well, as far as I'm aware, it's illegal. So it might happen, of course. It does happen, but it is illegal, and it needs to be treated as such. When we were, I mean, I'm not involved in the Basel Convention, so I don't have a clear idea of the latest development there about hazardous waste and so on and so on. But the general philosophy is that waste is too valuable to be exported. So, often in waste, I mean, at least in the ASEAN region where I was based before, it was not always clear when waste was exported who was to pay. The one who was getting rid of his waste or the one who was getting something. And even when the ship was full, they were still arguing on in which direction the money should flow. So we are not there anymore in Europe. We do have many value chains that are extracting material resource. Not, I mean, of course, there has always been, to various extent, waste to energy, but it's in Europe, it's a thing of the past. Now, more and more, looking at the material value of products. But the reason why we are able to do that and making the link to technology a little more is because we have a very extensive registry of chemical substances and additives. So it makes it much easier to categorize different types of plastic. And this traceability of plastics and chemical pollutant, I think, is a precondition. If you don't have this idea of what type of component, material component could end up in value chain and contaminate the value chain, it's very hard to have an efficient plastic economy. So while we were negotiating the mandate for a negotiating committee towards a global agreement on ending plastic pollution, the position of the EU was really to look upstream, to look at the design phase much prior to the disposal or even the use phase, to really try and think ahead of how we design products in a way that they are lasting, but also when they have to be disposed, they can be disposed in a way where they can be useful, can be made useful quickly again. And that's one link. I mean, if we would have a plastic sorting system that would be such that it will make it much easier for the informal sector to get standardized outputs that are much easily returned to the industrial system, I think that would be a major step forward.
Picking up on what you said about the design aspect of it, Anurag, I'm wondering if, because the India Plastics Pact, we're aware, is very much about dealing with the with parts of the value chain that are upstream of consumer use, also, moving the focus a little bit over there. What do you see maybe as perhaps a couple of the biggest challenges in achieving success in this part of the value chain, the upstream part of it, with respect to companies who have signed on to the pact and who have their targets to achieve? What do you feel their largest challenges might be?
So, Nandini, I think, in my opinion, technology and behavioral changes are two sides of the same plastic coin, and I think from a technological perspective, it's techno-commercial rather. We are talking about the use of recycled PET for food contact articles. We are talking about moving into recyclable packaging. Currently there is all the member companies who've signed up to it. There is a shortage of the availability of that specific material that we want to use. And therefore, we have to now go slow on the target to be there by 2030 because everybody wants it and the capacity in the country is limited. So there's going to be a bit of a disruption because we've all signed up to it. We want almost the similar material for our packaging. So there will be this doesn't change until your competitor also changes. Because like I said, there is a cost involved and therefore your competitor in your specific sector, whether it's packaged tea or detergent or whatever, your competitor also needs to move. And therefore it's important to have everybody as members of the plastic pact so that we can move the sectoral in the same direction. Of course, technologically there are, and we discussed that yesterday about recycled PET, about chemical recycling, and so on. So a significant amount of technological changes will be required as we progress on this journey. Companies will have to build the cost into their production, into their products, etc. When you change packaging, you also need to change your machines. So you just cannot change the packaging. You also need to align it with the consumer preferences because not all packaging will give you the same color or the same look and feel. And packaging is a very consumer-facing thing. So for consumer-facing organizations, changing packaging is a little difficult thing because consumer recognize the package with the color, with the hand feel, so on. So we need to, from a marketing perspective, we need to be very, very balanced in the way that we talk with our consumer and the way we talk with the sustainability part of things. At the same time, the behavioral change is important. So yesterday we had this very nice, very thoughtful presentation from Hasudullah, and which was about refilling and reusing, detergents. And I think that's more to do with, so you can have that refilling example for any different, it can be for shampoos or hair oils. In the past, it has been for milk. The important thing here is a behavioral change. Is the consumer willing to go there and take your own bottle, fill it up and bring it back? And that's something which the consumer has to step out. Not everybody, we move to an age of convenience, right? So not everybody wants to go and do that. So is there a way that we can create that behavioral change? Is there an incentive we can provide? Is something that the industry will have to work on this journey. It's about the convenience versus the environmental part. It's so much more convenient and also with the small formats. The sachets, the small bottles. It's so convenient. If you're traveling, you need those small things. But obviously, they're not so good for the environment. And also in certain certain parts of India, it's much more affordable. If it's a 2 rupee sachet, it's a 3 rupee sachet, rather than spending on a bottle which may be 100 rupees. It's much more fits into your budget. So I think all those things, that's a behavioral change part of things, about small formats and convenience versus environmental. So those are two parts. I think the other challenge we always, and I really salute these organizations who are working in the informal sector, the waste pickers, the sanitation workers. They are really our warriors. They go about cleaning the city. They keep our city so clean. But at the same time, I don't think they're receiving the incentive that is due to them because of the extended producer responsibility, the law which has come in place, the plastic waste management handling rules. I think thousands of crores, and people put some numbers, but it goes beyond 1,000 crores, which is going into the EPR sector now. We don't see that amount of money flowing into the informal sector and changing the lives of the waste pickers. And that's something which really concerns us. So that's a challenge, I mean, you cannot only bring about changes in consumer behavior, in technology, but not have changes in the lives of the people who are actually doing the real collection. So I think those are few challenges one wants to highlight.
That's absolutely true. It's a very, very difficult set of circumstances to optimize. Very tough. Sujaya, just for maybe a short comment from you on, I'm aware that you are shareholders in a few businesses operating in India. I wonder how you manage to encourage these businesses to manage their plastics better. Is there a definite way that you hope to go about this?
Thanks, Anthony. There's certainly no definite way. One of the things we've found over time is that engagement with all of the companies we invest in it's a journey that's slow and it's a journey that requires persistence. But as with our work with Tata Consumer and Anurag, one of the things that we've learned over time is that being long-term shareholders and active owners is a key way to drive some of those changes. We're investors at the end of the day, so thinking around plastic, the details around plastics management, we're not experts on any of these topics, but being able to learn from academics, from NGOs, from third parties, take some of those best practices into dialogue with stewards of these businesses is how we think about driving those changes. At the end of the day, we think about working on issues that we see as business risks. And so issues that we would hope the stewards of businesses we invest behind to want to engage on. And so for us, when we have those conversations, they're conversations with a decadal time horizon, because as with plastics, we don't have a solution tomorrow. And so speaking with the likes of Tata Consumer Products over a long period of time is how we think about driving these changes. And some of those details around transparency of information, disclosure of the work companies are, goes a long way towards helping us understand the work that's being done on the ground and understanding what else to ask of our companies as well.
Yeah, I think there's also a huge difference between the kind of environment that prevails outside India, and different geographies probably have their own characteristic features, which makes it very difficult to apply the same principles everywhere. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Anurag and Sujaya, for your insights and your comments on this very, very complex area. I think the more we talk about plastics and their management, the more we realize that there's so much work to be done, and work to be done at every single point of the value chain. So I think we all just need to wish each other the very best of luck, and hope that we get somewhere as time goes by. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lily.
Thank you, Sujaya.
Thank you. Thanks, Sonia.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude